Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne and today is Tuesday, December 3rd. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. La Nina is a weather pattern that affects global climate and weather systems. Today, we are joined virtually by Jessica Spaccio, a climatologist for Northeast Regional Climate Center, who will go into details about La Nina, what it is, and how it affects our weather. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Now, I think this is super interesting because I've never actually heard about this before. So, can you tell me a little bit more about La Nina and how it is actually affecting our weather?
Sure, yeah. So, basically what a La Nina is it's when we get the sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific are cooler than normal, and this has to last for a 3 month average before it's actually classified as a La Nina. And basically, when that happens, it changes. The kind of the rainfall patterns in the Pacific, as well as global circulation patterns.
And how does this differ from El Nino?
Sure. So an El Nino is the opposite. So instead of a cooling of the equatorial sea surface temperatures, the El Nino is a warming of those temperatures. So it basically kind of causes an opposite effect to have with the rainfall and also affects the global patterns as well.
Now, how often do La Nina events occur and how long do they typically last?
Sure, they occur every 2 to 3 years, and they'll last usually maybe 1 to 2 years. And typically, they're kind of will kind of flare up seasonally. So even if it lasts an entire year, it's normally not strong for the entire year. And a lot of times we flip flop. So we'll have a La Nina for a year or two, and then maybe we'll go ENSO neutral, which is either neither La Nina nor El Nino, and then we'll go back to an El Nino. So it kind of goes back and forth within this pattern.
Now, what are the primary global weather patterns associated with La Nina?
Sure. So when we get these cooler ocean temperatures, it causes a lot of kind of storminess in the Western Pacific, where the warmer temperatures kind of get over to that westward side, and so that will change the patterns. We'll get a high pressure system over the Pacific, and then that'll cause the jet stream to kind of get wavy over the northeast continent where we are, and as that kind of goes through. It kind of has this low pressure system over the kind of the Midwest, and then the jet stream will go up over the Northeast where we are, and greatly affects our winter weather.
And I'm so glad that you're mentioning this because many people have noticed that, in October and even November, the weather was a lot warmer than we're used to. Is this somehow an effect of La Nina?
So it's not, no. So we're actually not technically in a La Nina yet. We are in a La Nina watch. So we do expect La Nina to emerge in the next couple months. We're watching those cooler than normal temperatures are occurring, but it needs to happen over a 3 month average to be officially in those conditions. So it's something we expect to kind of emerge over winter and affect our winter weather. But as far as this fall, that was something different. We had a high pressure stuck right over the Northeast, led us to these really warm and dry conditions.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. I know that with everything that's going on with the weather, sometimes there's overlapping and things can be so confusing. So thank
Yeah.
you for clarifying that. Now, the NOAA predicts New York City will have a warmer than normal temperature between December 2024 and February 2025. Can you explain, maybe why we're seeing this and how either, La Nina or El Nino could be affecting that?
Sure. So La Nina can make our winters in part of the Northeast region a little bit warmer. So that was looked at for that forecast that was put out. But a lot of this forecast, really, the temperature forecast was dependent on long-term trends, because La Nina at this point is expected to be weak and doesn't affect our temperatures quite as much as precipitation here. And we have those long-term trends that really were a major factor in those above normal temperatures.
Now, kind of focusing on New York City a little, have there been any notable examples of La Nina events that significantly impacted our NYC weather?
Yeah, so we were also in a La Nina last winter, and we had a very mild winter. Not much snowfall, but above normal temperatures. So we don't have to look too far in the back to see that we can be affected by that in our winter.
Now, how does La Nina influence hurricane activity, and what does that mean for New York City residents?
Sure. So the ENSO patterns can affect hurricanes. And basically it has to do with wind shear. So when there's different kind of patterns in those global circulations, if there's more shear in the tropics, it's harder for those hurricanes to kind of persist and get up to our area. If there's less shear, then it's more likely that those hurricanes can move on. Now that will be over kind of the summer and fall. So currently, because we are in ENSO neutral, that wasn't an impact on our current season very much.
Now, how do meteorologists track and predict the influence of La Nina on the city's seasonal outlook?
Sure. So as far as like the ENSO itself, they're looking at those sea surface temperatures and and a lot of other like the depths. How deep are those cool temperatures going? How strong are those anomalies? Is it really below normal or is it close to normal? So really watching how those sea surface temperature changes are emerging, as far as how strong the ENSO will be. But also as far as here, in the northeast part of the region and in the Bronx, looking at the strength of the La Nina and then looking at what else is going to impact the region. So if we're looking at a weak La Nina, that may mean that those impacts are a little bit less. There has been some research that during a weak La Nina, the Northeast actually sees more snowfall, but that's not for the entire region. That's kind of seen more in parts of New England. I'm not sure if that trend is so significant in the Bronx, but a lot of times we will see kind of towards the south part of our region kind of drier conditions. So I think that's something that we could see this winter for the Bronx is if we miss out on a lot of that precipitation coming through, then that could be dry, which is not great because that part of the region is already seeing drought conditions right now. So it would be great to see some winter precipitation to alleviate those conditions.
Now, how might climate change interact with La Nina events?
Yeah, so as far as how they affect them forming and things like that is an area of research. It's so complicated and how those form. So that's definitely something that's being looked at. But climate change, of course, does affect our weather. And that's, like I said, the long term trends were a big part of the winter temperature outlook. And those long term trends are impacted by climate change.
Now, how does La Nina typically affect global weather patterns?
So the global weather patterns that we see is we'll see a strong high pressure system over the Pacific, and then we'll see a kind of a high or another low pressure over the kind of the Midwest of the U.S. and then a high pressure in the southeast U.S., which is why they tend to stay kind of dry and warm because they've got that high pressure down there, and that jet stream kind of splits and goes around those, and so that is really how it affects those the global circulation pattern is it's affecting the jet stream.
Now, I think that this is such an interesting topic because whether you're a climatologist or meteorologist, all of us, we kind of interact with the weather every day.
Mhm.
And even if we don't know what's going on, we kind of see some of the changes. What would you tell somebody who may be interested to understand, what's going on with the weather around them? What could they do to understand this a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of online resources. The Northeast Regional Climate Center, we have a page that we dedicated just to La Nina. So there's some graphics and some videos. You can learn more about it. I also love the National Weather Service. They put out great forecasts, and I really rely on them, especially going for the short term outlooks. Short term forecasts to see what the next week is going to be and looking to them. And they have great tutorials on their websites as well to explain kind of the different weather phenomenon.
And I want to mention, kind of bringing it back to New York, we've recently kind of had a drought. Can you explain how La Nina may have affected that, if at all?
Yeah, so La Nina hasn't really had an impact on the drought to date. It could have an effect on the drought depending on how this winter plays out. So yeah, the drought has been pretty significant this fall. There's been a lot of wildfires and impacts that we've seen because of that. So we are hopeful for some winter reprieve that we'll get some precipitation to help with that. And so La Nina may or may not bring that. Sometimes we can get a lot of storm systems that track through the area that would bring some needed precipitation. But if those go a little bit north of us and we get that drier pattern that we see in the southeast New York, then it wouldn't be beneficial.
Well, I just want to add, I think this is super interesting and I would love to learn more. What is the most interesting fact that you've learned about La Nina, throughout your study?
I think it's just, that we're so interconnected globally. We talk about something that's happening in the Pacific and how it changes our weather here on the eastern US. And so I think, that is the really interesting part, that even though something happens in another part of the globe, that we are all connected and it affects different parts.
Now, how can public awareness and forecasting help mitigate the impacts of La Nina on urban populations?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as impacts is whether it's going to be storminess or continued drought, that awareness is really the best thing. So realizing, okay, when we're dry, maybe we don't need to water our lawns, things like that. And then as far as watching for if we are going to get some of those coastal storms coming up, to be prepared for those.
Well, Jessica, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Again, this was a really interesting conversation, and I've learned a little bit, already, and it's definitely something that I want to continue learning about more because, as I mentioned, so many of us are noticing, just some weather changes, and even if we don't know what's going on, we know that it's happening.
Mhm.
So, once again, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open right after this.